What horrors?
Colin, we haven't heard from you in so long.
Yeah,
where have you been?
I'm so sorry. I was really busy today. I actually just got back from Olympia. I had a big day.
Oh, tell us all about it.
It was a lot of fun. I was with just so many like-minded patriots, and it felt good. It felt really good to be out there in the sun on the steps of the Capitol in Olympia. Just
wow.
Oh man, it was a fantastic time.
Just out there, not being shredded on.
Yeah, exactly.
Guys, if you want to see, you can actually check out Colin there's a photo from a PBS story. There's probably other photos up. And if you look like the one I'm looking at, Colin is his back is to the camera, so you can't see his face, but I know him by his sort of build and his black hair. He's wearing a sort of biker cutoff leather vest with a big patch on the back with like the snake from the Gadsden flag, and it says "Libertarians, Liberty or Death." Libertarians, I guess that's your biker gang, Colin.
Was his club?
Yeah,
whatever.
That's right. Thank you, Brian.
His cycling club. I don't know.
Yeah.
Well, I see you're right. You have your probate standing right next to you here. So, and you guys brought your banner, your Q Patriots banner. So that's cool too.
Yeah. Well, where we go one, we go all, Brian.
First rule of a motorcycle club.
Yeah. But in all seriousness, I've just been crushed under the weight of domesticity and having macaroni and cheese every day, sometimes twice a day. You know that scene in The Watchmen where Rorschach gets incarcerated and he's like, I'm not locked in here with you, you're locked in here with me. That's what it's like having a toddler.
Cool, but it's about to ease up, right? Like
yeah, it's smooth sailing from here until Tuesday when the next baby is supposed to get here.
Awesome, congratulations.
That's when the stork delivery is, right?
Yeah. So it hasn't been postponed due to coronavirus.
No, we have a plan. It could get postponed based on availability of rooms because we're actually going to do an induction. But we'll see. So Tuesday the 21st is the plan unless she comes sooner.
Mm-hmm. Cool. Yeah, I was talking to our buddy Jay today, and he was like, we should root for tomorrow, 420, man.
Yeah, they all are. That's I mean, yeah. Somebody called her Adolfina, I think. Isn't that also the anniversary of Columbine?
Yep. Yeah.
Just a great day all around.
It's my aunt's birthday. It's my Aunt Nancy's birthday.
Oh, man.
Well, that's great. And people, if they want to show solidarity with Colin, they can stream Mr. Mom on Netflix. And Colin, if you for some reason just cut out in the middle of this episode, like you just vanish, we'll know that the kid's here. You've had to rush to the hospital.
Yeah,
and
yeah, it's possible.
So, but you were at least a part-time stay-at-home dad before the coronavirus crisis. So this isn't all new to you.
No, it's not new. It's just more. And as you both know, I've been working nights. So instead of having more time, I've had less time than maybe ever in my entire life.
That's amazing. Wait, are you somehow working full time now?
Yes, I'm working the exact same amount of hours. I just work a full day now I don't because my wife is on leave, but until Friday, up till Friday, I was hanging with my daughter for the full day till she went to sleep. Sometimes, as you know, at 10 p.m. And then
logging
I would do
on
2.5 hours or
do
more
some coding
of work. Yeah, it rocked. Yeah,
that rules.
Cool. That's great.
Yeah.
All right. Well,
So boy.
Good. Yeah, I mean, I can't wait till little Z is old enough to go to to strap on a gun and open carry at a protest at the Capitol
with her dad.
Yeah, you mean today?
Yeah, she's behind the Q banner. That's right.
Yeah, she was on my shoulders, holding a gun, shooting it into the air. Oh, cool. Yelling, "Live free or die."
Wait till she gets older and realizes that's the worst time.
Brian and Greg are busy. And we have a return guest, Codename Tanya Esquire, is here to fill us in about the life of a lawyer in
She's
quarantine.
not here now.
Well, okay, she was here. To be perfectly frank, I was not here when she was here.
Yeah.
But she was here.
She was here on the boat with all of us, breaking quarantine.
Okay, so yeah, we've got an interview with Codename Tanya, backed by popular demand.
Enjoy. Greg, how you doing? Still in quarantine?
Yeah, still in quarantine. Just going bleary-eyed, looking at like DIY sailboat refit YouTube, and like reading like technical like manuals on like fiberglass layup and like epoxy and like just living it, man.
Cool. That sounds like
same.
something. Sounds like something a detective would read out as they're investigating your suicide. I am also enjoying quarantine in that Bryn is making a lot of bread and I am eating it. But we also have a guest. Yes, a guest on our quarantine podcast. We got Tanya, the official lawyer whose advice and information is always completely actionable, and you should consider legal advice.
Our lawyer,
she's our official podcast
representing us in all of our interactions with the courts.
Yeah, and she
Codename
represents us first and foremost. All right, so all other clients take a back seat. We're number one.
We have her on
right?
retainer.
I've been assured this.
Definitely true.
How are you enjoying quarantine, Tanya?
I'm also reading all about sailboats.
Really?
No, just kidding.
Oh.
Greg got so excited for just a second.
It's like, I found someone who can understand. Probably similar to everyone else, like a mixture of like, it's not totally horrible to be forced to do nothing, but also it is sort of totally horrible to be forced to do nothing.
Yeah.
But at least since we're not like, at least since the courts have been shut down and we're not like rounding up people for petty bullshit crimes anymore, you're pretty much just staying at home, right?
Oh, I'm ready to retire, actually. Yeah, they just decided they don't need public defenders because there's no more crime. There's no more people in jail.
Oh, good.
Well, guys, we did it.
Criminal justice, the silver lining of COVID-19.
Yeah, police jails both abolished. Well, this is mainly a celebratory show. Yeah, this is a celebratory show. We're just gonna pop the champagne. Tanya's happy she doesn't have to go to work anymore.
I'll have to find a new line of work, like sailboat racing.
That's why you're reading up on sailboats.
Well, now hang on. I didn't say. Yeah, I didn't say that we had solved crime. I said we weren't like, sensibly, we weren't prosecuting petty crimes and jailing people anymore, and we were just letting, as I would, like to see it, like crime run rampant. And as
look out the window, you'll see a crime.
Yeah, exactly. Well, I mean, like just this is from way back in April 6th, but on My Northwest, Jason Rant's transcript here says, titled Seattle burglary explodes 87% downtown after coronavirus policy crisis. Wow. Yeah, I guess like. Oh, after coronavirus
staggering numbers
policy, crisis, because it's about the policy from the city to not book anyone for misdemeanors. So crime is just running rampant, and because we're not prosecuting anything or jailing anybody, which I'm good by me.
So it's kind of interesting because so Dan Satterberg, our head prosecutor in Seattle, King County, he has created some policies that would sound similar to what you're describing. However, despite him being the head of his office, apparently his lower level attorneys who actually do the charging and filing of cases didn't hear about those policies and are not following them. So there actually are some.
What?
So crime is
good
still being
in writing. Crime is, so for Superior Court, Dan Satterberg told the New York Times, the failing New York Times, that only serious and violent offenses are being prosecuted. So then you would assume...
Like car prowling and burglary and petty theft. Those are serious.
And interestingly, in the law, crimes serious and violent aren't just willy-nilly adjectives that you can attribute to car thefts. They're actually statutorily defined. There's serious crimes. There's violent crimes and there's serious violent. Those are statutorily defined. But that's not the definition that the head prosecutor is going by. He's apparently just filing. I mean, they're not filing as many cases as they usually do, but that it took a really long time for them to stop because they operate sort of in a backlog. So filing decisions that they do a few weeks ago come to arraignment like 14 days after they file them. So it took at least 2 weeks, if not more, for the flow of stupid ass cases to slow.
And it would be impossible to put a pause onto that, right?
Right, like they act as if it's a stream of water, and if they tried to stop it, then
it would be, right, like it would just be a waterfall of crime, because if you're saying that they are in fact slowing the prosecutions, and I'm looking at this number quoted from SPD, burglaries up 87%, that means like there's almost double the crime and we're prosecuting less of it. That means like an enormous number of the criminal class are just going sort of unwhipped.
That's what you would think. I also saw an article in the Seattle Times about how you need to go out and check your car because most likely it's been stolen. Well, you were too busy watching Netflix and chilling. Awesome. They've been stealing your cars.
Wow.
Yeah. Oh man. What a world we live in. Well, let's maybe go back to the beginning a little bit on this whole the courts and coronavirus. So are the courts actually open? Like, are you if you're doing your job, are you physically going into the buildings?
So I can only really speak to King County Superior Court. Although obviously I'm not speaking for them, blah, 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 legal disclaimers. My opinions are Tanya's alone. The courts are open. So there's a few cases, law cases. One is referred to as Bone Club, and one is referred to as Ishikawa. Those are both Supreme Court of Washington decisions about open courts doctrine. So basically,
we need to know more about Bone Club.
I know, it's a pretty great name, and I don't really know the history of it. But judges are supposed to conduct what is called a Bone Club analysis before they close courts to the public, which is generally a good thing. The Seattle Times was the plaintiff in the Ishikawa case. It was like Seattle Times versus Ishikawa, because I think that it must have involved something where they were not letting reporters report on a case, and the Seattle Times sued. But essentially, it's very hard to close courts if you're doing anything in them. They have... Well, first of all, I want to start by saying that King County was extremely slow to react to all of this. So in the time when Jay Inslee was ordering people to stop gathering in groups of 250 and then 50, and then I think it was 10.
Which itself was a slow
the courts were still... It was slow and a little bit perhaps too slow. Courts were operating as usual, and there were some, especially the stranger, had some good attention to that. There was a picture that someone took of defendants waiting in 1201, which is the main criminal courtroom in Seattle. And then the main criminal courtroom in Kent was also just business as usual. It was packed. The way the courtrooms...
Packed with the criminal class. Were the judges
true, but also
wearing PPE?
Also us poor lawyers had to...
Did they have... Well, I mean... Did the prosecutors, the judges, and the bailiffs get masks? Is my first and only question.
Interestingly, no one was at all protected during this stupidity of keeping
generally speaking,
open during
all of those
crisis.
people, I mean, except the poor bailiffs, probably, managed, the prosecutors and the judges probably managed to keep a safe distance from the criminal class generally, even in the courtroom.
And that is very key to understand just like the physical layout of a courtroom. In both 1201 and GA, which is the main courtroom in Kent, the judges are probably like 20 feet back, and they're also kind of elevated. They kind of sit along maybe like the wall of the courtroom, and then the lawyers are on each side of the courtroom, and then there's a glassed-in area behind them where all the people who are out of custody and anyone who's watching are. And then they come in like one by one into the courtroom and sit with the defense attorney.
So
usually these courtrooms are completely packed with attorneys. Like there's usually like depending on the kind of calendar, there could be 20 prosecutors and 40 defense attorneys in this like tiny room that probably should hold like 15 people in general. So like the biggest clusterfuck hearing is called Omnibus, happens on Fridays, and I think that's where they took the picture. But when Jay Inslee was like, there should be, no gatherings of more than 10 people, there were like 50 lawyers in this fish box room.
Hell yeah.
And this one old attorney actually brought in 2 yardsticks taped together to show 6 feet. And he was kind of like doing it as a joke. And at first the jail was like, you can't bring that in here, because the jail's in there in the courtroom too, to like, making sure that everything is quote unquote safe, even though we're all breathing in coronavirus.
So they wouldn't let him bring his like prop.
So they wouldn't let him bring his prop
comedy.
But then I heard that later the jail actually asked to like borrow it so that they could like see what it actually would look like to put people 6 feet apart.
Wow.
But fast forward to now,
stepping up, the protectors of our society.
Right. Keeping us safe. And like in individual jail guards' defense, like I don't think any of them like made any of these decisions or necessarily want to be in this cesspool.
Be jail guard.
But what it took was that the Washington State Supreme Court wrote an order that basically paused most civil and most criminal cases until first it was April 24th, and then they extended it last week to May 4th.
Oh, so it's like rent, like it's on pause, but when this is all over, the book's gonna come down on you. Yeah.
Yeah, so that's also kind of true for the attorneys who work in the court system, because everything is pushed, but nothing is gone. So it's going to be, cool. Whenever this reopens, it's going to be a disaster. Like about 2 years ago, we closed court for like a week or so during that snowstorm. And that like screwed a whole bunch of stuff up, just like logistically. So
yes, but so if you're already like,
so now
it's going to be a disaster.
At this point, though, is there still stuff functioning in these courtrooms?
Right. So I never answered your question. Yes, court is open. It's limited, but every day there are arraignments, which is when someone is newly charged with a crime. It's like mostly like their first hearing. Those are still happening for supposedly only for serious and violent offenses, but you can look online. There's a daily calendar that's posted, and you can judge for yourself whether or not you think that the crimes being prosecuted are serious and violent. There's also an issue because the way felony cases are filed in King County is that about maybe like a third of them are filed at summons, meaning that you get a letter in the mail saying you have a court date and you got to show up at a certain date and time. But other cases are filed at a warrant. So the prosecutor decides a random number based on what they're saying is the likelihood that this person is going to commit another crime, going to interfere with justice, and it has to be a violent crime. So even though someone has only on the record a whole bunch of car thefts,
violence against
and
cars,
they're being accused of stealing another car, they still have to make a finding that the person is substantially likely to commit a violent offense, even though there's no basis to make that. Anyway, so they'll pick a random number. And the number is usually between $5,000 and $200,000 that they'll file the case at. But not all of those warrants get served immediately. So I'm getting some cases that were filed at warrant last year, and the person just got picked up by the police during this public health crisis. And it may not be a type of case that would be considered serious or violent, but those are still happening.
Oh, cool.
So you could basically have a warrant served on you, be dragged to the courtroom petri dish, and then be locked up, pending bail, right?
Well,
and a different
exactly,
petri
because
dish.
The calculation, for whatever reason, well, we don't have to speculate of that reason, but the court rule says that you must have your arraignment within 14 days after filing of the case. But that also is like 14 days after you are in jail. So, but for whatever reason, and I'll let you speculate, the King County prosecutors, they're in charge of setting the dates, and they always pick the 14th day.
Interesting.
So everyone basically who's in custody at their arraignment has been there for 2 weeks.
Interesting.
Well, that's just management, practice. That's just like, you don't pay your accounts till they're due, like you leave yourself some room there.
Right.
Well, what kind of What kind of like latitude are they giving to, maybe not keep everybody in jail awaiting trial, since again we're in the middle of a pandemic?
So the prosecutor's office very generously went through their list of people who are incarcerated waiting for their trial, and they picked a select few individuals who they believed could safely, quote unquote, safely be released from jail. Unsurprisingly, it was a very small amount, especially in felonies. I think they released a lot of people who were in jail on misdemeanor charges, which is also like, why are they in jail on misdemeanor charges? Yeah. That's a good question to ask yourself. Mm-hmm. But they released a lot of people who were accused of property crimes and gave them varying degrees of notice about when their next court date is, and let them out and hope for the best. But that was I was estimating that was like about maybe 100-ish people. They also have decreased the jail population by allowing people, quote unquote, allowing people who are serving Department of Corrections sanctions to serve those sanctions in Department of Corrections facilities instead of in King County Jail. So there were people who were not pretrial waiting for King County prosecutors to try them. They were people who were kind of under different jurisdiction. They kicked them out, but they didn't free them. They just moved them.
Yeah, they just played like musical chairs with what jail they're in, essentially. Yeah. Like put them in a bus, send them to another jail.
Yeah, well, and another also kind of what we've been touching on, but a big problem with this is like the processing of people into jail is, I would imagine, like a public health no-no. So if before the Supreme Court order, when they were just doing business as usual, if you are out of custody and you are charged with a felony, you have to be booked into jail and then released. Basically, they like take your fingerprints, take your picture, all that. But as you can imagine, that would be like an excellent way to like ensure that every single defendant in the criminal justice system is exposed to COVID-19, whether or not they are in jail or out of jail. Yeah, you're forced to go into this petri dish to do your processing, which takes a few hours.
Cool. So, well, and there's kind of like a quiet admission that we have here too, right? And that like, letting the 100 or so people out just to like go home that are waiting trials up too, that maybe we just have a lot of people in jail just don't even fucking belong there in normal times.
Right. Which is also kind of one of the, bigger questions that all of these littler issues bring out. Like, for example, there's a really great Netflix documentary called How to Fix a Drug Scandal. And I highly recommend it. And it's about how it's really screwed up that all these like really hardworking immigrants and other sympathetic defendants are being prosecuted for drug crimes when the toxicologist who tested the drugs herself was actually a drug addict and using all of the evidence to get high. But then it never really took the next step where it was like, but if the toxicologist wasn't a drug addict using all the evidence to get high, it would be totally chill to incarcerate these otherwise extremely sympathetic people. So, yeah, when people are criticizing or improving the justice system in ways, they usually don't take that next step where they're like, wait, but like, this is all actually really screwed up. Why are like jails are a public health disaster, even if there wasn't a pandemic, like tuberculosis in jails, MRSA's in jails, tons and tons of diseases that most people never like would get.
Legionnaire's disease.
Right.
Yeah. Other exotic fun ones.
Well, yeah, and it's interesting too, this idea of like it'd be okay if the examiner wasn't also like doing meth, but the thing is, it's just the bad apple thing, right? Nothing in our justice system is ever bad on a systemic level. It's always just there's an individual with like doesn't have the moral fortitude for lady justice, and that's the problem.
Right. So when people are like, oh my god, it's so inhumane that people have to be forced into these disgusting conditions during a pandemic. It's like, but it doesn't disgust you that they're forced in these conditions in a normal day. So,
well, what's it like for you then dealing? So you're a public defender, right? So what's it like for you dealing with your clients? And also, can you give us your clients' names and the crimes they committed?
Definitely, I'll fax over my official case list. I guess I still haven't really answered your question though. Like, if the courts are open, they are open for certain things. They're open for bail hearings, which is also touching on what you were asking about. People who are in custody have the right to ask for basically another bail hearing based on the pandemic. Although certain prosecutors who are hopefully going to be cursed forever and burn in eternity have been opposing these jail requests, saying that COVID-19 public health pandemic is not a quote change of circumstance which actually isn't required for a bail hearing, but prosecutors think it is and judges think it is, that if you already asked for out once and the judge said no, you're supposed to be able to show a change of circumstance why you got to ask again.
Yeah.
Which obviously is pretty hard when you're sitting in jail because not a lot changes for you. Like you didn't usually like, get a job or like, become not homeless when you've been sitting in jail.
Well, it implies nothing could possibly be wrong with the original ruling, right?
Of
that you should be in jail pending, bail or not even denied bail, right? Yeah.
Yeah. But some of these people who work under Dan Satterberg, the quote unquote liberal prosecutor, with a straight face, even write motions opposing the defendant's right to even ask for another chance at freedom during a public health pandemic. So I wish the best for those people and, certainly don't hope that they rot in hell forever and ever and ever and all their loved ones also die of COVID-19. Never thought of that.
I mean, hey, if they want to keep coming into court and prosecuting these people, I mean, it's on them if they end up dying of COVID.
Well, now a lot of the so of course King County, which is in Seattle's in King County, which is the tech center of the world, they have not figured out how to do like Zoom court, at least for court. A lot of like smaller jurisdictions have got it all down, and it's obviously I believe there's a lot of issues with deciding issues of liberty over the computer. Like I think it's a great value to look someone in the eye when you're thinking about what you're going to do, but it is still probably better than the phone. Our only option right now is either come into court and, without any PPE, there's like a perpetually empty Purell container in the courtroom that everyone touches, to try to get it out.
Yeah. Isn't it funny that every job in America has the same empty Purell container for their employees? But,
no, seriously. So you're forced between choosing to do that or go over the phone, which is like, I've only done a few phone hearings because I either will hand it off to an attorney who's there in person or will go in person to do my own hearings. But it's just extremely disorienting. So they use this like kind of like a party line, like a call-in line for a courtroom. So they have like a 1-800 number, then you have to put in your code and press pound. But so they also, the same line is available for like the public defenders. I think the prosecutors are on the same one, although I wouldn't be like shocked if they had their own private line. But there's also interpreters and family and friends of the clients who are having their hearings. So the one hearing I did, there was like this guy's mom was on the line, and she like did not understand that she was being broadcast in open court, even though I kept trying to politely tell her. And she also didn't understand how to like mute her phone. I think she thought that she would not be able to hear if her phone was muted. So she had her phone off mute, and she had like another phone that like kept getting other calls during the court hearing. And the judge would be like, "Ma'am, you have to like mute your phone." And she's like, "But it's my daughter-in-law. I'm going to answer it." It was like a just complete like disaster. And I'm like, everyone can hear you, and they can't do their own hearing. But yeah, so I'm like doing my argument to get my client released, and then this lady's like crazy ringtone is going off, and then she's like answering, and she's like, "Can you hear me? Can you hear me?" And I'm like, "Do I stop talking? Like, is anyone listening to me?" So it was really disorienting. I did get that client out of jail, but I don't think it was much.
There's a win.
Yeah, it was successful, but I was like, I'm never doing this again.
I love that because like, obviously I have to do sort of Zoom conferences or whatever, mainly with people in my department, but we have all the same disasters of people's phones are ringing, people like have their shit unmuted and they're like having a conversation with somebody. So it like fucks up the entire like thing. But the only thing that happens is that the stuff we weren't going to do anyways, is not getting done. But like whether we had the Zoom call or not, that would have been the case. It's a little different when it's like, this is going to determine whether somebody's sitting in a cage. Literally within an hour, whether that person will be inside a cage.
And certain judges have like been really horrible on release based on COVID-19. Like you could just feel these people are going to be such on the wrong side of history. It's like, this was maybe like 3 weeks ago. I was sitting in a courtroom during a bond hearing, and this judge was just denying every single person's request for release, either saying that they hadn't provided proof of their medical condition, basically saying that I don't believe a word that comes out of you or your lawyer's mouth. It's also pretty hard to provide proof because to get quote unquote proof, the public defender would need to get a release of information, like a medical release, and then contact that person's doctor. So you're asking the public defender to go into the jail and like share a pen with a person in jail. So bringing, first of all, the public defender's germs into jail, and then also, exposing the public defender to the germs in the jail. So that's probably also like not advised. Our department told us to like limit trips to the jail to like necessities. And then also then you'd have to get hold of someone's doctor, which like I don't know if anyone remembered, but like there's a public health pandemic. If you like call your doctor's office, they're not like, oh hey, how can we help you? They're like, is
we got nothing but time to hang
okay, hang up. So she would either say, we don't have proof that your client has high blood pressure, diabetes, all these other huge correlating factors of death with COVID-19. Or she would be like, well, there's no evidence that you're under 65 and there's no evidence that you're going to be at any greater risk than anyone else. But obviously now, like 3 weeks later, there's like so many news stories about like completely healthy people who have dropped dead or been otherwise horribly affected.
Well, that's the beauty of like the American criminal justice system is it, no matter what part of it you choose to look like. So if you're weird like me and you just want to read cop magazines, you look at these people and you think these are the worst human beings that have ever fucking lived. But if you also want to like learn about prosecutors and you really look into that, you'll be like, these are the worst human beings that ever fucking lived. And if you look at judges, you'll say the exact same thing. And it's just this beautiful like symmetry of the criminal justice system that it's a conglomeration of all the worst human beings that have ever existed.
Seriously.
And the dumbest.
It's like... Yeah, the first death in the Chicago jail, I saw an article saying that the public defender had motioned for his release, had been denied. And it's like, you just hope that these judges, like, at least are cursed. Maybe you kind of hope they feel bad. Obviously, they don't. But you hope that at least they'll get eternal.
Yeah, something bad will happen to them.
It sounds like I believe in, like, religion. I don't, but it's kind of the only way you can, like,
Yeah, well, when
people are doing like
when there's no power to actually send these people where they should be. Well, I mean,
right? You just have to.
Where there's no politics available to really combat this, to get rid of these judges, to get rid of these prosecutors. Like
and if you read the comments on any of these articles, people are upset that anyone's even getting released or.
Oh yeah.
So
yeah, I know in New York, I mean, they were throwing a giant anti-release propaganda campaign in the middle of like New York being the worst like COVID-19 hotspot in the fucking planet.
Right, and it's just cool. Also people think that it's not gonna like they basically think that we have a leper colony of the jail and it's not gonna impact anyone else's health. So even if you don't give a shit about these people. It's a really bad idea to have a hotspot of coronavirus in a community that's otherwise like sort of social distancing and has it otherwise sort of under control because people get released from jail. Corrections officers work in jail and return home. Public defenders work in jail and return home. Like this is not a good thing for anyone, even if you don't give a shit about the individuals who are incarcerated.
Ultimately, that's basically like
no.
That's basically in the end like saying. All this entire, this enormous prison population, these people in this generation of people in prison for life on like 3-strike drug charges. It's like saying these people have families and communities that have been devastated by this. Or like, these people are human beings. Like the people who want these people to stay in prison, to go there and stay there and die there. See themselves as completely isolated from the imagined criminal class. Like if you're this shithead who's like, we shouldn't be releasing anybody, keep them in there, let them die. You're probably a suburban, well enough off that you feel like you're safe and protected, that you are not a part of a community, that you are a human being and the poors aren't, and that if we just got rid of all of them, your life would be the same and better, So like you're totally disconnected from anything. You're a piece of human garbage, basically. That's what I'm saying.
Yeah,
well, and it's the sort of suburban logic too. Like if to make another tortured metaphor or something, it's like if you were in the coal mine and somebody showed you the dead canary, but you're like, I don't live next to any canaries, and just kept working, right? Like it's a complete inability to see the crisis coming because you just don't you just care so little about like everything around you.
And at the end of the day, they're probably not wrong in a lot of ways. And they'll be able to get through this entire thing. Believing and not be proved wrong, like if you're able to work from home, or if you're able to, sit in your suburban home and collect unemployment or whatever, or you're like an old retired shithead who this isn't really affecting, maybe you'll get unlucky and you'll get it and you'll get sick or you'll die, or people will, but probably a lot of the worst people will just get through it just fine, and they won't be wrong that they are isolated and not connected communally to the poorest, sort of most vulnerable, most preyed upon by our sort of police state.
Although I do think, though, that, well, this kind of, I guess, is changing subjects, but I think that's fine. Just to the fact that, so right now the jail is denying that there have been any positive cases. There is some speculation that the jail is moving anyone who may be positive to a hospital, and so letting the numbers say, well, there's no positive people in our jail.
Yeah.
But by all accounts, like, we've been really lucky, because even if they're distorting the numbers, I think it would become very obvious if everyone was super sick, the way it's become very obvious in Cook County, in Chicago, and in Rikers in New York. It's very hard to cover up, people dying. But I do think
the difference, though, right? Because at Rikers, aren't they just basically treating everyone who gets sick there in the prison medical facilities, and no one's leaving? So, that could be the entire difference here, potentially, is that they are just they're getting people out to medical care,
But I don't think that goes too in hand with, like, what we think we know about the virus, which is that, like, you can be asymptomatic and spread it, and that you can spread it before you're actually sick enough to, like, go to the hospital.
Yeah.
So I don't really know what's going on. Obviously, it's a black hole of information, but I think we've been really lucky, but I don't think it's gonna, like, why there's no logic that would, like, spare King County jails from this disease when, like, nursing homes, etc., have not been.
Yeah.
So,
well, there's no reason to believe the luck will hold out, right? So,
well, that's kind of what I'm getting at, right? I think that we are overdue, and we've been extremely lucky, but it's going to happen where the population is going to be exposed, because how could it not? Like, there's no actual way to social distance in jail. You have no freedom of movement. You share confined spaces with other people. The whole, the way jails work is the opposite of social distancing. Because how could you have anyone power and control over people who are not all in one group? Like, if everyone's spread out, they could escape or whatever, quote unquote. But I think that we are overdue for a really scary and tragic situation in these jails, and I think that is gonna set back whatever, like, progress we've made, because we've seen this comes in months, multi-month waves. And if we have delayed it so far in the jail, that's obviously good, but I don't think it's going to be permanent. And I think we're going to see the ripple effect of that, setting back the, quote, progress that King County and the state have made with keeping people inside.
Yeah, if it gets rampant in the jail, right, it's going to leak out of the jail.
Absolutely.
And then, and it'll
cause another.
You created, like, a hot spot, essentially.
Yeah. And it will be
cool.
Yeah. So there also was the Supreme Court at Washington issued a directive for Jay Inslee to reduce the population of the Department of Corrections. So that's another humongous hotspot and situation that I think is also going to be extremely dramatic, just in the way this virus spreads, because they already have confirmed cases in Department of Corrections, and there's so many people in Department of Corrections versus local jails. Like, I don't know the number. I probably could have Googled that before the show. Think about it.
No, never researched. Never researched.
But it's enormous. Like, because I did look up the King County jail stats. Right now, there's 1,263, so 1,263 people in King County jail, adults and 26 kids. It was reduced by about a third in the past, since March 13th. So the past about a month. But not all of it's just due to them releasing people. A lot of it's due to movement of quote unquote inmates to DOC, people accepting guilty pleas and getting released, or people just having served their sentence and getting released. And then some of it is due to the agreed releases from the prosecutor's office, and also due to the unagreed releases that the public defenders bring in front of the judge, and the judge sides with the public defender. There's also been a humongous increase in electronic home monitoring and other pretrial services. Like right now,
cool.
there's like room for about 100 folks to be on ankle bracelet, and now there's like 300 folks. So it's like they're operating on a shoestring.
Yeah. Cool. So you did, I wanted to highlight in that list of things, you did mention there is a cheat code, right? Which is if you just take a plea bargain and plead guilty, they'll let you out of the petri dish. So that's cool.
Yeah, there's for people who are lucky enough to be accused of crimes that don't carry humongous sentences. There was definitely a wave of releases because that's one of the few court hearings that are allowed, or pleas and sentencings that result in release in the near future. So I had a kid who was not from here. He was accused of some domestic violence situation that, like, we basically had his girlfriend recanting everything. Like, she didn't want any of this prosecuted. She was like, I made it up. I was pissed off. He had a new girlfriend, blah, blah. But he's like, well, I can sit in here, but my trial is postponed until at least April 24th. And this is like early March. Or I can plead guilty to some stupid misdemeanors I didn't do, but I can be home with my family and like maybe not die. So he chose that path. There's also, it'll be interesting to see what happens down the road, because in order to make a constitutional guilty plea, you must be making the plea freely and voluntarily. So I can imagine challenging pleas such as that one, whether or not it was entirely free and voluntary when your options are pretty slim. Yeah,
you're in the middle of a pandemic. In a petri dish.
And like the lack of information, I think, is also just really upsetting to think about. I've had clients who have various health conditions that don't necessarily correlate with COVID-19, but how the frick are they supposed to know that, right? Like they're I have like hepatitis B. Does that increase my risk? Like it sure sounds like it should. I'm quote sick, So I don't think it actually does. Like I was trying to do some research for my bail argument, but imagine feeling like you can't even Google like your pre-existing condition and COVID-19 and see what you get.
Well, I think this shows, in regular times how awful this is, right? And that they can hold people pre-trial in a fucking cage and essentially dangle this, hey, whether you're guilty or not, if you just say you're guilty,
right? And that's a huge, especially in like misdemeanor practice. The plea offers are very regularly like 30 days or less, and then your time for trial is 60 days, and that's best case scenario. Like if there's no quote good cause for continuance, the fastest you're getting tried is 60 days from the time you set up for trial.
Yeah, and so this becomes 60 days in jail. Of course, we're not arresting rich people, we're arresting poor people. So 60 days in jail means you don't have a place to live anymore, you don't have a job anymore, all that kind of stuff. But yeah, it's just especially perverse again in the middle of a pandemic when people are hearing about disease running rampant in jails across the country and stuff like that, and then and some fucking sleazy prosecutor coming up to you and being like, "Hey, you want to spend the next 2 months in this fucking box over here?" Or do you want to just say you're guilty? Come on, say you're guilty, right? It's perverse.
Yeah. Well, it's definitely perverse, but then it's also sometimes like it is a good idea. Like I don't know what I would pick if it was me, but
I think it's easy to see why people pick it, right?
Definitely not a bad idea. Like I would not want to be waiting this out in jail.
That's why they can't let up on this stuff now, even during this pandemic, because ultimately, yes, this is it's a public health risk, and you're it's even worse than normal to be in jail right now, but it's a matter of degree still. It's being in jail always sucks, and it's always dangerous, and it's always a public health problem. All of the, and all these reasons that you wouldn't want to, that you would argue like, that you shouldn't be going to jail right now. Like it's the same. It's just a matter of degree from how like barbaric our system normally is. So if they let up and just say, well, okay, like let's roll back, because let's just not keep people pre-trial in jail during this period because it would be bad for their health, and it would be bad for these people like that. Then you shouldn't, then that sort of acknowledges that these people are human beings, that we should have some kind of consideration for them at all, and that there's something wrong there's some reasonable reason to not keep them locked up. Like they don't need to be there, right? And if you admit that they don't really need to be there for any reason, whatever the reason is, like then what the fuck are they there for in the first place? Nobody should be held pre-trial. It's insane. It's a disgusting practice along with everything else about our criminal justice system. But to let up on that now would be to admit that this doesn't have to happen.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the bigger picture things that is everyone's going to put on a blinder to. And I guess in some ways, like, I do think King County is at least the judges in Kent are doing like a somewhat okay job with release, although I've had some infuriating decisions made lately. But yeah, I mean, they are letting people out for this reason, which is a good thing. And I guess it'll be interesting to see what happens with like the people, like whether or not people are going to like make it to their next court hearing, especially as I think I mentioned before, they had a court order that pushed everything out till April 24th, and then they extended it to May 4th. So people's court dates have been moved multiple times, and they haven't necessarily been told. So that'll be interesting to see how it affects people coming back. And then also, obviously, what the prosecutors are waiting for is to see if people are committing new crimes when they otherwise should have been in custody. I think there was some case out of like probably Florida or something like that where someone who was released because of COVID-19 murdered someone. But then it's like that kind of statistic is like so incredibly stupid though, because it's like, who knows, first of all, what they were held for. Like if they were held for one murder and then they got out and murdered someone else, like sure, good point. Like they probably shouldn't have been allowed to do that. But if they're held for like stealing a candy bar and then they got out and murdered someone, it's like, so did you want to give them the death penalty for that candy bar? Like,
well, it's a false logic too of the idea of like this one guy did this one. Yeah, well, this one guy did this one thing once, and their basic argument is like, well, if we have to keep 1,000 innocent people in jail
to prevent one murder, let's do it. Like, no crime would happen if every single person was like unable to move. Sure, let's paralyze the whole world, and then we'll be really good.
Yeah, and it just becomes like a quick like ad hoc rationalization for putting people you don't like in prison, right? You know, or taking the underclass and putting them in a cage. But yeah, well, how do you think the court system should be operating? I guess I think we've hinted around it a little bit, but how do you think it should be operating right now?
Well, obviously, I think releasing the vast majority of people makes sense. And then, I mean, it depends if you're like an actual like prison abolitionist or not. But even if like the population was reduced a lot, then the jail would be safer too. Like there wouldn't be as many people there, and they would be able to actually practice some sort of the public health guidelines. But I think it just is like a complete paradox as it stands. Like I don't think that we can pause constitutional rights but also keep people locked up. I think it has to be an either or. It's either that the pandemic is so bad that we can't incarcerate people and we can't try them for their accusations, or it's not. Like it can't be both. Which is the current state. Like the current state is that it's too dangerous and no one is going to be willing to come in and do a jury trial. Like no jurors are going to be willing to come in and no witnesses are going to be willing to come in. So we're going to pause your right to a speedy trial. But we're not going to, mitigate the harm that we're causing by pausing your civil rights. And I think they would probably say that they are by increasing the releases, but where does that leave the people who are not released?
Right. So there are still people being held pre-trial who are having their trial dates pushed by like a month. And that's just, they're just going to
so much more than a month also. I think that's
right.
Another
That's
thing.
what I mean. But like, we haven't even gotten that far, but so there are people who are just potentially going to be, who at this point have blown past the normal, like even absurd rules for like being held pre-trial because their dates have been pushed back. And there isn't, along with that, a blanket policy of release.
Right. I think the government has to choose. I think the government has to say, we are protecting society by not having these trials, so we have to release you. They can't have it both ways.
It seems pretty straightforward.
Both ways at this point.
That may be of everything. That may be the most disturbing and disgusting thing in a system where people are already kept, and we've talked to you before, like you can be stuck in there for a long time procedurally before your trial, that now during this, they're just having it just sort of arbitrarily kicked down a month, 30 days at a time. And you're still sitting there rotting in jail, having been convicted of nothing. Like,
right. And I think that it's kind of the same same rage that people are feeling outside of jail, where it's like the government told me I can't go to work, but then they are telling me I still have to pay my bills, which like, it's not fair. And like people are feeling that like fundamental like paradox of listening to the rules versus existing in capitalism.
Well, the mask is sort of the mask is sort of fallen off, right, on how one, the system is essentially arrayed against you, right, and that you're like fucked, right? And this the idea,
and that the government isn't
here to help you,
right? They the federal government, I mean, people probably have given up on most people, but like you would think that liberal, somewhat wealthy Washington state could like figure out a way to actually support people who are out of work, etc., but does not appear they have.
Yeah, it's just not on. Well,
we only have like
it's not even in the realm of political imagination. Any of this stuff. I mean, that's what this demonstrates so clearly. Is like that in this just already disgusting situation of holding people, for long periods unconvicted pretrial. That can't even. That it's still outside of the political imagination that you have to keep some of these people still, even as their dates are being pushed back in the middle of this pandemic. I mean, that just tells you that there is a hard limit on sort of political ideas to even like consider the rational, like humane choices here.
Absolutely.
Oh man, well that's cool. But I think it's similar to the refusal to like freeze rents and things like that. One of the things we had talked a little bit off mic was that we brought up the Jason Rant's 87% increase in crime, which is, anytime you get a number from old Jason, it's, take with an enormous grain of salt. But there is some truth to the fact that, we have no safety net for anybody. Everybody's unemployed or clearly marching into a depression. And apparently there was a thing in the Seattle Times, they've allowed landlords to actually keep raising everybody's rent. So not even just like, we can't even hope for a rent freeze.
That has come
moving out. All members are canceled.
I think as of a few days ago in Washington State, if I'm not mistaken, there is now a proclamation, a new proclamation from.
That kind of bothered me too, though, because it's like, shouldn't they be like lowering rents since like
of course, no. Again, it's so
now they're like not allowed.
This is just sort of
are we saying supply and demand doesn't work
thing, right? Yeah, no, it's absurd. Like, yeah, but no. Apparently, there was a new proclamation from Inslee saying you can't raise rent.
Which is like, really, do we have to like say this?
Yeah, I mean, right.
Yeah.
Like,
well, apparently we did.
Apparently we did.
Well, that and like this idea too that, I mean, even a rent freeze, it's like nobody has a fucking job. Nobody has any money coming in. There's no social safety net. And it's like there actually could be, a crime wave or something after this or whatever because of how like destitute they've made people and desperate. Yeah.
Well, and I think also like just the way that I don't know what I was talking about before, but when the society and the government that you are living in does not treat you with respect and does not follow its own rules, like, work hard at your job and you'll do okay. Like when all of that goes backwards, like why are we expecting individuals to be like, okay, I'll still respect private property laws and like not take advantage of loopholes or whatever that I can see when it's like so clear that everyone around you is benefiting. The upper class is benefiting.
When it's very clear that all rich people have broken many laws and done many crimes against humanity and nature to get where they are.
Right. It seems very hard to ask people to be like, no, everything is like completely horrible, but you got to still play by the rules.
Yeah.
Whereas I got in them,
Fuck the rules.
But also, the definition of burglary is very broad.
Oh yeah, I want to hear about this because like I did want to actually seriously get into that. We actually said this. This was actually on the recording, Brian. But this 87% increase in the West Precinct in burglaries rate, like that's got to be some insanely juke statistic. Tell us about that. So there's a few different types of burglary. First of all, there's 3 felony burglaries. There's one is called burglary in the second degree, which is you enter unlawfully into a premise with intent to commit a crime within, but the premise is not a residence. So that's like if you break into a business. There's also something called commercial burglary, which is similar to that. But if you like break into a business or a scrap yard,
that could be burglary in the second degree. That also could potentially be trespass, which is a misdemeanor. But a lot of times you'll see cases that are pretty clearly trespass charged as a burglary because the police are inferring that the person had an intent to commit a crime, whereas like maybe they're just trying to like be somewhere.
Well, there's also that classic sort of prosecutor thing of, oh, we'll make it burglary so they plead down to trespass, right? You know, you give them the highest thing to get the lowest.
So then it sounds like a really good deal to plead guilty for like going somewhere that you didn't know you couldn't go. There's also residential burglary, which is like entering into someone's house. But there's also burglary in the first degree, which would be where you were either armed with a deadly weapon or you assault someone in the home or anywhere. So that's obviously the most serious type of burglary, is if you are armed and or assault someone. But I'm willing to bet that most of these burglaries are the burglary in the second degree, which is you enter into like a closed or abandoned area and like grab some scraps.
Yeah, or I mean, whatever the case, it's easy to
like,
and you know, easy to mess with this statistic in some way anyway.
Right. But also like, everyone is home right now. So like I really don't think people are like thinking it's a prime time to break into someone's house. So that'd be like pretty stupid. And also they'd probably be calling that a lot more than a burglar. They'd probably be calling it a home invasion or like an assault or
Well, I think if Jason had something juicy to give, he would have given it. I mean, this is always the key with Jason, is if he says burglaries but doesn't expound on it anymore, it's nothing. It's just some juiced bullshit. Yeah, I mean, because you're right, everybody's home, and you know, as we had joked earlier, like burglary is a pretty like solitary activity. You tend not to burgle with other people.
Yeah,
right. And like, if they're trying to like kill you, that's one thing. But if they're trying to grab something from a usually people are probably looking for like a quote crime of opportunity, like someone leaves their door unlocked and are not home. They're not looking to like have an armed encounter with someone standing their ground, which you can do in Washington. So
yeah, good to know. Well, so what's funny about that is, so that quote came out on, I think this was actually from Whitcomb on his show, is where he got that number. The 87% was from Sean Whitcomb on the show, but a week after that, April 13th, that was from the 6th, Seattle Times, shoplifting, theft, car prowls are down during coronavirus, but there's still plenty for cops to do. So yeah.
Oh, thank God.
Right. And also like, I just told you all that like the courts are essentially mostly closed, right, during this time. There's some hearings happening, but like when they're saying that burglaries are up, what they're saying is like people arrested for burglary or like reports of burglary are up, because no one in the time of COVID-19 has had a trial. So no one has been proven guilty of burglary since this has began.
Yeah.
Trials are paused.
Well, I can report that shoplifting's down because I went to the QFC the other day, and there was plenty of cube steak for me to purchase, and that's our local Safe Seattle barometer for shoplifting.
Also, like most stores are closed. So, like,
yeah, exactly.
Not a lot of chops to lift from at this point.
Yeah, when people genuinely are staying home, like there are less people out.
Oh, yeah.
So I think that even goes for the burglars, I guess.
And also, there's like always like huge seasonal trends in crime. Warm weather is like notorious for gun violence and other types of crimes. So I don't think that you could like attribute that to like COVID-19 or like the release of people from custody. I think that would be a huge leap. I'm sure you all seen the statistic that like it was the first March in history without a school shooting.
Yeah.
Just because March was canceled.
Yeah, I think it was like since 2002, which is,
right.
I mean, really astonishing to think about. Like
really
I graduated I graduated high school in 2001. So just to think that like
every
since
year.
My graduation, basically every March has been punctuated.
And I'm pretty sure just like a random month. Like I don't think Marches are like especially school shooter. It's just the only month we've had so far that we've been canceled.
We might get through April with that one too,
right, because there's like
we'll see.
No schools open, but
homeschool shooting maybe.
Damn, but they probably that'd probably be like justified.
Yeah, I know.
Well, also saying that domestic violence rates are allegedly up, but that's also a bit understandable. And
yeah, that is a lot more believable than the burglary rate. I'll tell you that much.
Yeah, I mean, it's not even just the amount of time people are spending with people they live with, but I mean, it's the whole like people's whole situations have changed in probably a lot of domestic situations that are just like not what they were. That's probably exposing people to a lot of vulnerability there.
Absolutely. And I think that there's plenty of research that shows that when people are financially insecure,
oh yeah,
domestic violence rises.
So you're saying when outside forces stress your relationship or stress you to a high degree, these things tend to happen? Interesting.
Somehow.
Well, it sounds like capitalism's working.
Yeah, this has definitely shown it to be the flawless system, and we should just let it run its course.
It could definitely handle a crisis. We figured that out.
Let's say fair.
So what's your what do you want to weigh in on the marches in various state capitals? You know, are you sort of like a constitutional originalist when it comes to you know, plagues and pandemics?
I mean, I'm certainly not, but I do think that like I do think it's complicated, I guess, because I think that they're fucking idiots for basically protesting for their God-given right to die from this illness and or like expose everyone else to it, which is, you know, I can't get down with. But I do think that like in the context of what we were just talking about, the criminal justice system, suspending due process for the greater good is really troubling, which is basically what's happening. They're saying that, you know, it's against public health to have trials, so you can't have one. And it's like, how long is that going to be palatable for? Like, I think that we were, public defenders were relieved by the court order at first because it was feeling very upsetting and dangerous to both our clients and ourselves to continue to have business as usual, where you're going into the jail, going into court every day. For both, for everyone, it seemed extremely foolish and dangerous. So we were wanting the courts to do something and to cancel a lot of hearings, but at the same time, it's like, it's so scary to think about being accused of a crime right now and not having access to justice.
Yeah, you know, because we built this like giant torture machine, and now we're saying, you know, even the few checks we have on it, they're all going to take a month off, you know, or whatever.
Right.
You know?
So I kind of see a little bit of that in the, you know, protests, which are obviously mostly people who I can't sympathize with at all. But the impulse to be like, we can't really trust the government to suspend our personal rights indefinitely without any like input from us.
And I think with some of them too, I think like the most charitable sort of like description you give is that this is the product of having a political imagination in the public that is exactly zero, right? That moves like, you know, can move exactly 1 inch to the left and right of like neoliberal capitalism. And, you know, it's not like they were born with like zero political imagination. That was skillfully cultivated like at every level of society. And it's just very depressing to see, you know, to see it in action now. Where it's like, this is all you can imagine from the state at this point is the demand to let you go back to work so you can die at the Arby's. I mean, it's fucking crazy.
Well, so you can, I think a lot of these people, you know, protesting are really protesting that, you know, they want their employees to go back to work. You know?
I think that's the core base of it, which fuck them.
Yeah, well, fuck them. But on the other hand, I mean, also like, look, I mean, yeah, look, these are your classic like Tea Party shitheads, your MAGA chuds. But like, you know, they're not. We don't have a. They are not getting the same information that we are. They just aren't. They're listening to, you know, if they're watching Fox News and conservative radio, like. They're not being told. They're not even really being told the details of this crisis, what it's doing, how it works, how serious it is, what the considerations are, the reason. All they're getting is sort of this, you know, right wing sort of Trump cover. And, you know, I mean, absent any of the like relevant sort of information about this, like, I mean, you know, what conclusions would you come to? I don't know. I don't have any sympathy for these people, but I mean, it's a problem of our entire like society. Like, we don't have a system for communicating to everybody things that need to be communicated. We don't have a press that does that, certainly.
And I would guess that a lot of people who think this is bullshit are like not powerful people. Like, they probably are like not highly educated, not.
Yeah, those probably aren't the ones protesting for the most part, but they probably are, you know, sitting at home resenting what's going on and not understanding.
Whoever voted for Trump, it's like, are they evil or are they wrong or what's the?
Yeah. Well,
I mean, y'all.
Well, as far as I think the protesters are, the classic joke is that they're like hot tub fucking salesmen and shit, but like, they have a ski-doo dealership. But like, I think the thing is duly noted about like the information they get. And I'm always reminded of, I think it was in 2006 when there was a big immigration hearing. Rupert Murdoch gave testimony in front of the Senate about how that they should go with like much more lenient immigration laws. And when they asked him, like, well, that's weird because on your network, that's not the position that you've been spouting. And Murdoch was just like, well, yeah, I mean, Fox News, that's for some groups. And what I'm saying is for others, basically, And I mean, I think they're able to whip up this sort of this class of people probably really aren't even benefiting all that much from Trump getting elected, but they got them whipped up and they think it's China, or I don't know what the latest conspiracy is.
China I think they have landed. The right has landed at like Trump's sort of urging slowly over time on the China thing. And the thing is, like, it's going to work. As bad as this gets, even if this is a total like cataclysm and millions of people die, that's not going to get through to Trump country, not in time for the election anyway. These things have long scale, right? I think we will. I think we'll have something. I think we will have something that passes for an election that gets Trump reelected, because both parties are going to go into this thinking they're going to win. So they're definitely going to have an election. But no matter how bad this is, Trump can still stand there and say, I'm doing a good job. And that's what his base is going to hear. And they're not going to be convinced, even with mass disaster, except over a very long period of time. And that time scale is not what's happening now. I can imagine this going very bad and then this economy completely crashing and not coming back, like total economic catastrophe. And I think if that happens, you will see Trump potentially leave office with the sort of lowest possible approval ratings at the end of his second term.
Which is just like too little too late.
Yeah, exactly. Right. Yeah. But I mean, it's not gonna, it's too, it's not a long enough time scale for people to absorb and really like have reality break through and go look for some different answer. If a bunch of people they know die and their entire like economic reality is crushed and it's been like that for 2-3 years and they realize it's not coming back, well, then you have to start looking, and Donald Trump's been saying the same things the whole time. Well, then maybe you have to start looking around for a different answer. But that takes a long time to get there.
But I think that's why it's tempting to blame China, because it's the othering, right? So that like people can have an outside enemy.
It's very
difficult to. But I think that also goes back to our conversation about like how people tend to not give a shit about those in custody or incarcerated or accused of crimes. It's easy to other them, and it's easy to say, well, if they hadn't committed the crime, then they wouldn't be in the cesspool of the jail. So I think that we have a kind of we have a sick world out there, and people have really I don't know how to describe it other than just disgusting or backwards ways of blaming others for conditions that are largely, the purposeful design of someone more powerful than them.
Yeah, well, I think that's the kind of uplifting message that we like to close out on here these times. Is there anything that you wanted to mention or get out there, Tanya?
That the stimulus checks are rolling in, and a bail fund is a great place to deposit yours.
Yeah.
A lot of people who are getting the stimulus checks are luckily somewhat unaffected. I think everyone's going to be affected in some ways, but are still, getting the same salary they got 2 months ago. And if that applies to you, consider donating to the Northwest Bail Fund. There's a bunch in New York City. There's like a national one. Philly has a great one. I think that now more than ever, it's very important to get people out of jail. Also, we didn't even start talking about the fact that there's a bunch of cases in the ICE prison in Tacoma and across the country. The people who are literally not accused of any crime other than existing are held on bail or without bail and are being exposed to these same conditions. So we should try to get those folks out also.
Yeah. Yes, definitely. Yeah. We'll put a link on the show for that, as well as a link to you were on the show previously. We talked about the criminal justice system. Back then, I think you thought it was going great, and man has it changed
my
you.
Personality getting more and more
yeah. So we'll put a link to that as well, so that people can check that out. Is there anything you wanted to add, Greg?
No. Thank you so much for coming on, Codename Tanya. This has been a really uplifting conversation. Always good to hear about how you're winning the good fight there in our police state system. So thank you. Thank you again.
Of course.
Thanks for coming on.
Thank you guys for having me.
Awesome. And hopefully in the future, we'll be able to open the boat studio back up again, and we'll have to have you back.
Yeah, I am depressed that I don't get to be on the water right now, but hopefully I'll get my cruise soon. I promise. Cruise.
Yeah, we'll be going out on the water as soon as this is all over. Everybody, as soon as it's all over, we'll be fleeing.
I'll see you May 5th
by water.
Yeah.
Okay, cool.
I think it's actually technically May 6th. That's when we can go back. But yeah, we're all going to crowd onto the boat, as many people as we can.
Sink it.
Great.
Well, thanks for coming on, and I guess I don't think we have any information to share about patrons, so do better, as always. Our listeners, do better.
Yeah, what the fuck is going on where people aren't paying for your show?
Yeah,
exactly.
The unemployment stuff is going to start rolling in too, so all you unemployed people, you might start getting
no excuses.
$100 bump soon.
Yeah,
2 days here, back to the 29th. So
yeah, we can. This country cannot stomach a podcast recession. So make sure that you're getting out and paying that Patreon.
Do your part.
Exactly. All right. Well, in that case, we'll see everybody later. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.